Accurate estimation of soil moisture is a critical component for profitable agriculture in Australia. It influences decisions relating to planting, field management, irrigation, and even stocking rates. Traditionally, soil moisture has been measured using in-field sensors, which can be inconvenient, expensive, and even impractical. The SoilWater app for iPhone and iPad has been developed to provide a simple, zero-cost, and convenient alternative to or enhancement of the existing traditional measurement techniques. That is, it doesn't actually require the use of physical sensors put out in the field, but can make use of them if available, improving our decision making. It does this by estimating soil moisture through the daily monitoring of rainfall, soil evaporation, and estimates of crop water use. As well as providing current soil moisture estimates, it also provides a future prediction based on approximately 50 years of historical records, up to 6 months ahead of now. The SoilWater app can be used to monitor fallow and both dryland and irrigated cropping conditions. It does this through combining Bureau of Meteorology rainfall and evaporation data with optional rain gauge measurements, push probe readings, and existing soil water sensor measurements. The SoilWater app allows users to set up and monitor a range of sites, which can be seen here presented on the home screen. To set up a new site, the user can click on the New Site button, which takes them into the site setup screen. Here they first need to define a property name and a paddock name for the site. They then need to select a climate station. This is where we get our rainfall and evaporation data from the Bureau of Meteorology. If a GPS is enabled on the user's device, the app will automatically present the 5 closest climate stations to their current position. There's an option as well to search for stations by Australian state. In this example, I'm looking to find Dalby Post Office, so I select Queensland, and then I can use the search box at the top of the screen to start to type in the name, which will filter the results, and then I select the station. This will take a few seconds to download the station from the Silo database. Finally, the user must select a soil type most representative of their paddock conditions. The graphic describing each soil here represents both the depth and the water holding capacity of the soil. The larger the dark blue area, the more water the soil can store. We call this amount the plant available water capacity, or PAWC, of the soil. Later on, we will present the current soil moisture level as a percentage of this PAWC. Having identified a suitable soil for your conditions, tap it to select it for your site. Additionally, the user can add a rain gauge or local rainfall data set, which will override the silo rainfall data, which we've just set up as Dalby Post Office. It will override this data for the period where local records exist. The SoilWater app is also compatible with Bluetooth rain gauges developed by the University of Southern Queensland, which allows farmers to collect rainfall data in remote paddock areas where no Wi-Fi or 3G connectivity exists. All this data is backed up and is accessible from the SoilWater app website. Also, the user is able to define local soil water sensor measurements either through manually entering soil water records, push probe measurements, or connecting to a University of Southern Queensland Bluetooth soil water sensor. Once these settings have been defined, we can now save this site and view the current soil moisture settings. However, we still have a little more setting up to do to define the management conditions before we can rely on the soil moisture estimation. Having already defined a soil type, we must now set up initial soil moisture conditions from which to initialise our current analysis. We will nominate a date with a known soil moisture condition up to 6 months prior. It could be based on a really wet rainfall event where we know the soil was saturated, or a prolonged dry period where there was little to no soil moisture. If additional soil water measurements are configured for this site, such as from a push probe or neutron probe, etc., it could be based on one of these records. However, to set a manual starting point, we define a date and a percentage PAWC. We can also set a prediction period here up to 12 months in advance, acknowledging that the further ahead we predict, the less reliable our estimates are likely to be. Next, we need to define the fallow and/or cropping conditions. A range of summer and winter crops have been predefined in the app and are based around typical planting and maturity dates. You can change these dates if you need to. You You can also set a fallow residue cover and in-crop residue cover as percentages to limit soil evaporation. There is also an option to schedule furrow, sprinkler and drip irrigations with a wide range of management options. However, we won't show that in this demonstration. Once the management conditions have been defined, we can then have a look at our soil water estimates. The first graphic shows the percentage of PAWC and the amount of plant available water in millimetres. We can also tap on this figure to toggle the output to report using a deficit terminology. Next to this is a graphic showing how full our soil profile is and where this water is distributed through the soil. If we scroll down further, we can see that we have a time series output showing two sets of plumes representing soil water conditions. The first plume represents soil water estimates for the current analysis period, from our initialisation date up until our most recent climate records. While the second plume is a future prediction of what will happen and is based on around 50 years of historical information. The dark blue line in the first plume represents the most recent soil water conditions, so this is what's happened over the last few weeks or months. The lighter blue line represents the average or typical soil water conditions during this period. The actual filled plume areas represent about 2/3 of historical conditions. This example looks at a fallow to see how it's progressing, see how much water I've stored and look at our fallow efficiency. So if we scroll down and have a look at our graph, you can see we started off this fallow with virtually no soil moisture after a cropping event. We've received some quite big rainfall events during this period, and we're up to around 76% plant available water. If we scroll down, we can see that we have a fallow efficiency of 31%, which looks at how much rainfall we've had and how much water we've used, which is pretty good. So overall, I'd look at this and say our fallow is going well. In this example, we'll look at how much water we've ended up after our last crop. We've got a fictitious crop of mung bean planted at Dalby. We can see that during the crop we got to very low moisture levels, but that was propped up by a couple of big rainfall events, and there was a couple of events in January, and overall now we're up to about 76% PAW, so we've done alright, although that crop seems to have got a bit thirsty. This is another fictitious example looking at the opportunity to double crop. I know that I've got a reasonably full profile, 2/3 full after my last crop, but can I get away with another one? This might be asked by someone who's had a good season but does not normally double crop. In this case, it looks like we might be able to sustain this crop, which is a sorghum crop. We don't get to 0 PAW, although it's getting a bit thirsty by the end in most of the years. This example is looking at how we might use SoilWaterApp to monitor our irrigation requirements. In this case, we're looking at a fictitious cotton crop planted back in October. We're currently sitting on 37% PAW, which is equivalent to 170 ml deficit, which I can see by tapping that figure. We've entered in our historical irrigations. In this case, we've put on about 380 mils over 4 irrigations. We can see we're sitting quite low currently. In this case here, if we can get our PAW up in that high region, we can see our future plume predicts that will then maintain that there's enough rainfall in the coming months to sustain this. So it's telling us at the moment that in one day we should apply 107 mils. Yeah, that should probably sustain us through the rest of the crop. Visit www.soilwaterapp.net.au for more information.